Let's begin with Chapter 1, Communication. Words are not enough. The chapter begins with a definition of communication. Depending on where you took COMM 1323, Rhetoric and Public Speaking, this definition may or may not sound familiar. For our textbook authors, the common elements in any communication process are the exchange of information through a shared system of symbols between two or more persons. The essence of communication is conveying a message, a common understanding between the sender and receiver. Noise is anything that interrupts the communication process. Figure 1.1 on page 5 illustrates the basic model of the communication process. The process begins when a sender has an idea. The sender encodes their message either with words or with hand gestures. The sender also selects the channel and transmits the message. This channel may be through something like a report or face-to-face communication. The receiver gets the message and decodes it, and they may or may not understand it. The receiver provides feedback to the sender through words or facial expressions. Once the receiver provides feedback to the sender, communication continues back and forth between the parties until the parties end the process. Communication styles come in different forms. The blaming style tries to find blame or fault. In the directing style, communication flows from the top down. The persuading style persuades others to follow a course of action. And finally, the problem-solving style works on identifying a problem and resolving it with a solution. There are two types of communication, verbal and nonverbal. Verbal communication is the spoken and written words. It is the language. Verbal obfuscation makes the meaning unclear. This can happen because of jargon or slang of a community that's being used unsuccessfully by a law enforcement officer, or it could be because of legalese, which is the use of legal terms with a community to try to explain what is going on. Nonverbal communication is everything else. It includes body language or kinesics, what you do with your eyes, your head, your posture, hand gestures. Voice, also known as paralanguage, is how you say what you say, how fast or slow you go, how high or low your voice is. Proxemics includes objects, clothing, or actually the use of space to communicate. And finally, there is the idea of gender, and that is that males and females communicate differently. The flow of communication occurs in two different contexts, formal and informal. The formal flow of communication involves the chain of command in an organization. It could be downward, which is the idea that the communication moves from the top to the bottom in the organization. This is usually how policies or procedures are communicated. Upward communication involves communication that goes from the bottom to the top of the organization, and this is where lower level employees may write memos or reports. Horizontal communication occurs when people on the same level in the organization communicate with each other. They may do this via email or face-to-face meetings. Informal communication is also known as the grapevine, and this is the communication that occurs through personal context in other ways, perhaps face-to-face or through text messages. There are many barriers to communication. Several of them are included in your textbook. Bypassing occurs when words are misunderstood. People can also have issues with listening. This happens because humans can listen faster than speakers speak, so there is a lot of time for things to go on in the listener's head. Culture and language can also be a barrier to communication. Those that communicate need to make sure that they have language and cultural fluency. There are psychological barriers to communication like defensiveness, and this usually involves a resistance to change. Common barriers to communication involve the physical context or setting. These are environmental distractions like noise or temperature or the way a room is set up. Finally, there are experiential barriers to communication, and this is because everyone has different experiences which may lead to bias. How do you overcome these barriers? Well, you need to ask yourself these questions. 1. Have you anticipated problems in communication? 2. Have you focused on the receiver and his or her frame of reference? 3. Have you planned to listen? 4. Have you created a psychologically appealing environment? 5. Have you eliminated the physical barriers? Communication occurs between people. Currently, different generations of people are living, working, and interacting together. These generations differ significantly. The current generations are the silent generation, which was born between 1928 to 1945. Their characteristics and qualities are described on page 18. There are also the baby boomers. They were born between 1946 to 1964. Their characteristics and qualities are described on pages 18 to 19. There is also Generation X. This generation was born between 1965 to 1980. Their characteristics and qualities are described on pages 19 to 20. There are also the millennials. They were born between 1981 to 1997. Their characteristics and qualities are described on page 20. And finally, we have Generation Z. It is also known as the iGen. This generation was born after 1996. Their characteristics and qualities are described on pages 20 to 21. There are barriers to intergenerational communication as well. There is stereotyping in which people think that all people of a generation are the same. And then there is workplace culture. This occurs when an organization's goals, strategies, and structure influence its managerial approach, and these may all vary due to generational differences. Instead of relying on tried and true methods of communication, criminal justice agencies need to consider the communication differences in each generation. The textbook discusses these differences. Baby boomers are discussed on pages 23 to 24. Generation Xers are discussed on page 24. Millennials are discussed on pages 24 to 25. And Generation Zers, or iGeners, are not discussed. What do you think about Generation Zers or iGeners? Managing multi-generational workforces involves different strategies. First, initiate conversations about generations. Second, offer generational and diversity training. Third, commit to age diversity. Fourth, know each generation's motivation. Fifth, gear benefits and options towards generation's needs. Sixth, establish rewards and recognition to each generation's preferences. Seventh, include each generation in policy development. Eighth, establish two-way mentoring programs. Ninth, personalize your style. And 10th, build on strengths. The authors also provide the following suggestions for bridging communication generation gaps. 1. Match formality to the culture. 2. Use multiple communication channels. 3. Individualize your approach. 4. Understand value differences. 5. Be aware of motivating factors. 6. Ask. Do not assume. 7. Be willing to learn. 8. Be willing to teach. 9. Acknowledge the differences. And 10. Do not take it personally. For journal entry number 1, complete the self-assessment of communication style instrument on pages 30 to 31 of your textbook. For each statement, indicate the degree to which you do it, with 1 being very little, 2 being little, 3 being some, 4 being great, and 5 being very great. Once you have done this, then add the scores for column 1 and column 2. If your score for the left column is between 21 and 28, you are probably a moderate blamer. A score of 29 or higher suggests you rely somewhat heavily on the blaming style. If your score for the right column is from 21 to 28, you fall in the moderate problem-solving category. A score of 29 or higher indicates a strong leaning toward problem-solving as your dominant technique.